So you asked me, what's the toll? The cognitive experience is sitting in offices all day long, trying to be tough enough to take the pain of this mind-numbing awareness that what you're doing is probably low value, but you have to do it anyway. And I think that is the drain, is you're this heroic human who is ready to serve, and then you show up to serve, and what you do with the minutes of that service feel unworthy of your heart. They feel unworthy of the passion that you bring to the role. And taskers are just one experience.
Hello, fellow leaders. Welcome back to the Military Leader Podcast. I'm Drew Steadman, and I'm excited to share today's conversation with you. My guest is Juliet Funt, best-selling author, keynote speaker, and an expert on how leaders can get out from under the chaos of modern work. You might know her book, A Minute to Think, which has taken off not just in business circles, but surprisingly across the military too. In this episode, Juliet and I explore two big ideas. First, we talk about the day-to-day busyness that weighs leaders down, the endless emails, meetings, and taskers that steal time away from real mission focus. Juliet has some sharp, practical ways to fix that. Second, we dive into leadership transitions, those moments when one leader steps out and another steps in. They're more fragile and more important than most people realize. Juliet shares new research about leadership transitions, some real-world lessons, and some great advice about how to make handovers smoother, more intentional, and a lot less painful. This is a conversation packed with insights you can use right away, whether you're in command, about to transition, or just trying to lead better every day. So let's get to it. Thanks for listening, and here's my conversation with Juliet Funt. Juliet, it is such an honor to have you here. Welcome to the Military Leader Podcast.
Thank you. And you've been a great new pal, and I can't wait to meet everyone in your audience. I met my very first service member a year and 2-3 months ago. I mean, I'm sure somewhere in my life I must have met someone in the military, but it was incredibly light before a year and 2 months ago when a couple things happened and the book became popular in the military. So it was almost a kind of a relaunch for us. Lots of new conversations, lots of new applications.
Good. Well, it certainly does have applications. And why do you think that it struck a chord with the military and the broader audience?
Well, the book is called A Minute to Think, and it is a manual on how to tame the craziness of your bureaucratic, inbox worshiping, hyperactive workday. And so I think that the military has a lot of that scenario. And I've said this many, many times, but the intentionality, which is a word we're going to come back to a lot, that's on the war-fighting side of the military is obviously spectacular. And any single time you guys need to fire a weapon, fuel a plane, there is no such thing as more precision. But then a funny thing happens on the way to the office where as soon as we move into garrison-related work, first of all, we kind of time travel into the 80s in terms of some of our technology and resources, but then
Right.
we lose that sharp edge. And why I'm saying you go into, and I've seen this in Air Force, Special Ops, conventional, that there is just not the same kind of orientation, precision, training, protocol around the daily beats that move every plot forward. So emails and meetings and awards and taskers, and it can be quite chaotic. And the stress it creates is subordinate to its larger problem, which is it is stealing hours from mission-related, readiness-related work. And that's the quantifiable, perilous problem, which is it's stupid work in the office that is keeping you from doing really important work. And that opportunity cost is what we've been exploring with the military for about a year. I think the book is resonating because it has a lot of strategies to fix that problem.
For sure. A couple times in command over my career, what I would tell some junior officers, especially the company commanders, because they come in hard charging, they're like, they're ready. This is their moment. You know, they've been waiting for this. And I kind of have to congratulate them and then kind of ground them a bit and say, look, about 85% of your job is simply running the army. It's doing the things to keep the army going, and it's that admin stuff. It's that keeping soldiers taken care of and supplied and trained and whatnot. And you might have that moment of glory where you're charging across the desert on top of your striker with your guidon behind you, and there's bullets and smoke going by and whatnot. But that might be one time out of your entire command, and most of it's just doing the things to keep the organization running. And so there's a little bit of this a little bit of grounding and reality setting in when leaders get into this repetitive task management. What kind of cost is that? And then talk to us a bit about the cognitive toll that it can take.
That's like a 5-hour podcast. So
Right.
let's just look at tasks. Okay. Taskers is the term. You're always going to hear me use terms a little shakily because there's too many branches I'm learning about concurrently, but tasker is what we say in the Air Force. Would that be for conventional as well, getting a tasker? Okay. So if you just look at the flow of that system as an example, SOPs or standard operating practices in business are supposed to flow in a linear manner. Imagine a form like a chart, a box, arrow goes to the next box, arrows goes to the next box. You want it to be able to have a predictable flow. If you look at the way that taskers come to humans in the military, it's more like box to an arrow to a carrier pigeon to the top of a mountain to the bottom of a lake to another box to it's just the most contorted system. And that's because there isn't a unified technology inside of which tasks are assigned. So people end up doing things like using email for task management, which has no suspense, it has no timelines, it has no tags, it has no groups. You can't see other people working on projects as they're moving in your direction. Lots and lots and lots of problems, just as
Mhm.
one small example. So you asked me, what's the toll? The cognitive experience is sitting in offices all day long, trying to be tough enough to take the pain of this mind numbing awareness that what you're doing is probably low value, but you have to do it anyway. And I think that is the drain is you're this heroic human who is ready to serve, and then you show up to serve, and what you do with the minutes of that service feel unworthy of your heart. They feel unworthy of the passion that you bring to the role. And taskers are just one experience. Sitting in emails in a flat comms email environment. We almost did a white paper on flat comms. We decided not to, which I can tell you more about later if you want, but we studied it a lot. And it's a beautiful system whose origins come from inclusion and has had spectacular stories of success. But in general, there is no training in the world of flat comms. People are thrown into that system and no one knows when am I supposed to skim versus read versus forward versus copy and what's important. So because there is no training, it's a constant feeling of overload. It's overload and overwhelm. So I sat next to a squadron commander in the Air Force, a female squadron commander who, I mean, this is a pretty elevated human, is a squadron commander in the Air Force who was almost crying 5 days into her tour because of the email experience of the role. There is something wrong with that, something wrong with that. And so we could get to meetings. You just point me in any direction, and the toll we see is quantifiable minutes and hours going in the trash instead of going to the missions. So let's say you had a whole brigade that said, we're going to spend 5 years becoming the most time efficient brigade in the history of the Army, right? And they really, really learn these things. Maybe they would be so efficient in emails and meetings and taskers that they would leave the office 3 days a week at noon and go out to the field and do readiness related physical activities because they would have so much more time. And so that correlation between office and war is not light and it's not a stretch.
Mhm.
It's an absolute direct correlation. And that's what we're working on with many leaders who are starting to lean into the fact that this is changeable and all it takes, really simple. You've already built that beautiful lens of intentionality. You're super good at it. You just need to pivot, just like pivot the scope away from the plane and onto the computer and you already know how to do it.
hmm You're, you're giving me flashbacks here to particularly my brigade command experience, which started in 21, and I read Cal Newport's A World Without Email, and I
Yeah,
was
love him.
inspired to change the world. And so I sat down with commanders and with the majors in particular, they were beholden to email as a coordination point, and so we read through this book and we talked about it, and the starting point was not even necessarily giving them a whole brand new system, because I was still realistic about the fact that we just couldn't, we didn't have the bandwidth to create some new way of doing Army right on the garrison side. But what I wanted to signal to them was that it was okay to do something innovative. It was okay to step back and not send the email. And it was okay not to get to the end of the day and think that an email from me is in your inbox that you have to go find and check, because it won't be. And to my sometimes to my detriment, but I didn't live on email. I didn't operate on it very often, and I wanted to give the team permission to be able to find their own innovation at scale and at echelon, and that ended up going a couple pathways that, like you said, we could dive into. But one of those was going into Power BI and using Power BI as dashboards that are fed from data sets that are already in the Army system. And so we created dashboards of information instead of zipping it around in inboxes. And the other thing it created was a policy or guidance from me that addressed the work-home interface. Really, this it's work-life balance, but that term is maybe not as accurate. But it's this idea that you can have predictable time off, and we'll I'd love to hear about the pause here in a second. But what we
Yeah,
wanted to tell people was that your weekends and your evenings, unless it's an emergency, they're yours, and to give
they
people that
should be. Oh boy.
predictable recovery time.
So you're covering so many great things. I'm actually just going to write a couple things down because I want to talk about, go back
Sure.
to talk about email. People like really tactical steps. And so you started talking about a tech cure, which comes from a certain personality mindset who's going to
hmm
solve it through technology, right?
hmm
Then there are people who don't gravitate toward that and they feel a little lost sometimes on what the simple things are that they can do. So I'll just rattle off a couple as we get to each topic. I want to make sure we hit a few actionable things. So, one of the most powerful things you can do in the world of email is just create one folder, and everything that is CC, BCC, FYI, FYSA, anything where you're not the two goes into that folder and you only check it once a day. So that's already a gigantic weight off of you.
That's huge.
Then
Yeah.
that's a huge one. It's really
Yeah.
simple. Another one that you can do is type, think, send is a beautiful progression. So we tend to type send, type send, type send because we're rushing. If you insert that little think, what we call a wedge, you may actually realize it's either too long or you copied too many people or you don't need to send it at all, or, "Hey, I'm gonna see this guy at 3 o'clock.
hmm
I could just tell him." And so
hmm
that type, think, send progression is really a beautiful, small, very, very, very small adjustment that you can make. The thing you were saying about evenings and weekends, I was on another podcast. I know you know Joe Byerly,
hmm
from the Green Notebook, and we were supposed to talk about a leadership strategy called the reductive mindset, and we got so interested in a conversation about texting in the evenings that we actually
hmm
lost the entire podcast episode, and we just talked about that. But I think it's
Yeah.
worth revisiting because when anyone is texting business related, work related stuff in the evenings, especially anyone senior to anyone subordinate, there's this powerful cueing that says, you got to do what I'm doing. And so we're taking away choice from people who would really like to be reading a bedtime story or having a relaxing dinner or catching up on their favorite show, but they feel that pull. They're not brave enough to turn off the notifications. So they ding, they hear the little, and then their whole evening is changed, or their whole weekend or their whole leave starts to change. So that's actually the same premise though of type, think, send. It works with texting also. You want to blah, blah, you're gonna just and
hmm
then wait a second, it's 7 o'clock. Wait a second, this person is on leave. If you can install that impulse control in yourself as a leader, you begin to breed a community where that's a norm. And so I couldn't agree with you more. It sounds like that was
hmm
probably the way that you were living as a commander.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, and had in the past, and I was driven not to have that because when you're the commander, you get to make some choices about how the organization runs and how the
Yeah.
climate gets formed, and I didn't want to live that way. A little bit selfishly, but like personally in my own family life, I did not want to live that way, and so and it as you're talking there, it reminded me that it's not just the texts that come through; it's the checking. Because how many times do we walk by the phone, just tap it and check, just tap it and check, and
Oh,
it's
hundreds of times a day.
because your mind is there, your mind is there.
The other
Um,
thing to think about, though, is that leaders who have a lot of heart try to get around that, and they say, I might send you stuff, but you don't have to answer it at night." And what they can't quite grasp is that the power distance of the entire relationship is larger and stronger than this innocent sentence, "Oh, you don't have to respond at night." You don't have to respond at night cannot possibly stand up to the power of just, "That is my boss, and he is in my inbox or in my text thread," and it just the pull of that is impossible to fight, so you have to keep it out of there in the first place.
a new commander coming in, stepping in, just took the guidon or the colors day one, coming in to meet the team as a commander for the actually in the seat for the first time. What would you recommend that they tell the team right off the bat in order to start to set the right climate that we're going for here?
Well, we were talking about a communication and balance climate, and I'm guessing that that would not be the topic that would be day 1 for any leader coming in, so maybe let's pull back a little bit to start talking about just general transition, even though that's an important piece. We, our role is to bring this intentionality and to help you guys. It's fun that we're from industry and we don't know you very well. It breeds this wonderful objectivity. You can see still don't know some of the stacks of how the groups roll up, but there's a good thing about that, which is that you get a different perspective, right? And someone can see you from the outside. So as we've been talking about all these things, a commander came to me and said, "Will you come and facilitate an offsite for me outgoing and my incoming? Will you come and be a facilitator and get us on the right track?" So that led to the white paper, which we're hopefully going to be sending out by LinkedIn toward the end of April, early May, before a soft week for special ops. And it's just, hey, how is this command transition done? What are the good, the bad, and the ugly of the way that it shakes out? And we've done something like 40 interviews now across various branches, across multiple countries. And what we found is that that lens of intentionality hasn't really made its way to all of military leadership transitions. There are absolutely
Hmm.
outliers who are 6 months ahead thinking through, "How do I hand off and how do I prepare the other person?" But in general, there's some checked out behavior, there's a little bit of ego-driven selfish behavior we're hearing about, and then I think it's just a wide range in the middle of nobody's really ever talked specifically to leaders as they come up about what are your responsibilities in the handoff. In fact, we found when we started collecting data, and we have a survey that we're going to hopefully push again to your audience on this podcast, that only 24% of leaders feel fully prepared in their own definition to take command. And that's a little scary considering the world and what we have at stake every single time a new leader steps in. So we have a lot to work on. What was also very interesting is that there were correlations, the data correlated between availability and preparedness. So the more available the outgoing leader was, the more hours they had spent with the person, directly correlated to how prepared the person felt. And so we're learning a lot in a lot of different directions. If you ask me day 1 what a commander should do, I think what I've heard from the smartest leaders is be warm, be self-effacing, and start listening, because that new sheriff in
Hmm.
town gonna come in, I have 1,700 ideas, and I'm gonna drown you in newness. I don't think that that seems to be serving anyone very well. What was funny is as I was listening to these interviews, I thought, "Oh dear, I think that's probably exactly what I would have done if I," because 'cause I'd be all excited if I was coming in command, but, General Hecker is an Air Force General 4-star that I love very much, and he's at USAFE, and I got to interview him. I've also done some work with him, and he said, he just really slides in slow for the first 30 days or so, kind of hang out, get to know the people. He also has a document that we're going to publish in the paper of kind of General Hecker's few pages of here's how you get to know me, which is a lovely thing. But to refrain, I think maybe the word that comes to mind is to empathetically think about the other people in the room and realize that coming in like a bull in a china shop with all this change is only adding to the necessary change that everyone is already going through, especially, and this came out in some of the verbatims in the qualitative part of the survey, if it's one of those tough transitions, if someone has been removed or if a unit has been doing poorly and then some sort of emergency switch out, those tend to be incredibly sensitive and uniquely sensitive scenarios where not only is there a logistic challenge to make up for lost time and improve outcomes, but there's also sort of a wounded slash grieving population that has been part of this tumult and probably not really noticed in terms of its effect on them, so you're coming into a sensitivity. It's like the difference between walking into an ICU waiting room and the cafeteria in a hospital, there's a different tone, and I think that those units seem to need more sensitive, a more sensitive adoption of whatever the new leader is thinking.
That's a fantastic point. The way that I've talked about it before is you like imagine you're the captain of a ship and you're in the middle of the ocean. The first thing that you should do instead of telling the people on the ship and what to do is to figure out what waters you're in, what direction are you
Mm,
pointing, how high are
mhm.
the seas, where are we supposed to be going, and that's understanding your environment and understanding the team that you've taken, just taken over.
And this is where that preparatory period starts to become really interesting because to me, my original impulse when we started working on the paper was that all of that should be before you arrive. That if you were doing good prep, you'd be getting fed all that information. But the more I talk to live human commanders who've been in and out, there's only so much you can study, and then the rest you have to experience. And so
Hmm.
I think there is a point you can study a lot, and I think people should study. We have protocols that we're playing with and recommending in the paper about what we think is sort of the ideal flow.
Hmm.
But there's nothing like observation and feeling out the actual humans sitting, talking, listening, observing body language, figuring out which topics are hot, trying to suss out why they're hot. None of that can be done two-dimensionally on paper or on a digital
Or from a
document
distance, yeah,
or from a
yeah, and
distance.
I'll tell you, given the command authority that is so sacred within the military, the incoming commander has to be granted access to that formation. It's the current commander who's in the seat that whether or not they are open or closed in the process. And if they are closed, then that new commander is not going to get access to the staff or
Yeah.
anybody there before they take the colors. I think that personally, I think the right answer is to give them access early. Not honestly, not too early, because there is a balance. Some incoming commanders think that once they start talking to the staff, they can start telling them, weeks ahead of time, hey, I want you to do this and build this product for me. And the commander that's in the seat is still the commander in the seat and needs stuff
Oh,
from that staff, right?
yeah.
And so there is this little bit of tug of war. So it deserves some transparency between the incoming and the outgoing commander about what the boundaries are in that relationship.
I've literally never said this on a podcast, but there's a Jewish word, mensch, be a mensch. And a mensch is like a person who's just good. Just be good, be nice, be honest, be caring, be good. You just need to be a mensch when you're in either of these roles because it is only through the weaker parts of ourselves, our ego, our distractedness, our selfishness, our little moments where we're not considerate, that most of the stories that I've heard are just people not being super great and kind to each other in that process. And if you really were and you slowed it down and just said, how could I make this wonderful, just wonderful for this next person coming in? You'd probably have a lot of the answers of the things that you need to do, and it wouldn't be complicated. But I was surprised. The first couple times I heard a story of someone said, yeah, they left the BlackBerry and the keys in the truck and said, the BlackBerry's in the truck. Have a nice day. I thought, wow, that's got to be some jerk outlier And then I heard those stories again, and then I heard them again about 0 time in handoff, never met the outgoing. And so this is a trend that I'm still trying to figure out in such a kind and honorable population how that could be so repetitive. And I feel that it has to be some blind spot that is not about being a mensch. I believe that most of the people in the military are very good people. So there must be some blind spot where they think it's unnecessary or they feel like maybe they would be overstepping to ask of too much time. There's something
Mhm,
else at
mhm.
play here. They
Yeah,
can't just be
it
that
could be
many
their
people are a jerk.
mental and emotional state too. I mean, the end of command is an extremely busy time, and I
Mm.
mean, I've known people, and I have been burned out at the end of command, and it's when all the
Yeah.
evaluations are due. I mean, you have 80 or 100 evaluations to write, and all the pressure
I didn't
and
know
all
about that one.
this ceremony and everything. So I can envision a leader who is under that pressure, not proud of the state that they're leaving in. They're maybe a little bit cynical uh, about the way that they were evaluated by their boss. Who knows what that is, and so there's all those factors in there too. I think that
The
hits a
only
little bit
problem with
on.
publishing the only problem with
Yeah,
publishing this paper is, like, every single day I have another interesting
another
conversation. I might
insight.
have to keep amending it. We'll keep it on a drive instead of on paper, but
That's right. That's
maybe
right.
that's never even come up. I didn't know that you had to do all those evals at the end, so my efficiency brain immediately says, "Can you do them way earlier so that you could be more mindfully present during the most important transition?" Maybe, I don't know, maybe they can be reduced, shortened, offloaded, done earlier. That's a really interesting
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah. And if you're good, you get them done before you change command. A lot of people that I know end up doing them weeks and months later. Honestly, they go into their next job and they still have leftover
Oh,
evaluations from the
man.
previous one. Yeah. So, well, let's talk about ego and humility during transition for a second, because that's something that we've discussed before. How does that tension show up for leaders?
I think you could probably also throw territoriality in there, something about, "This is my camp, and I did it my way," and maybe even a, um, projected fear that isn't even grounded, that the new person is automatically gonna start taking things apart that they really cared about, and so I think that all of those, baser instincts are often addressed well with just the communication. Now, you're gonna get if you get some super ego-oriented, selfish person leaving command, you're just gonna have to work around it. You're not gonna really be able to work through that. But again, if it's a blind spot where someone's just too weary or too distracted, I think you can start talking through those little insecurities and working through them. So for instance, one of the things that we really advocate is for incoming and outgoing to spend more time together. That can be Zoom, it can be coffee, it can be Teams, it can be right seat, left seat. But when that is happening, if they have honest dialogue about, here are my dreams and aspirations, and here are mine, they can exchange those realities in a respectful way. So, for instance, the outgoing commander is done but still has aspirations. I might aspire that a certain program is kept intact because it was really dear to me. Or I might aspire that the way that certain things are remembered, are heralded, or consecrated in some way. I might have an aspiration of how I am remembered. I think the word legacy is more of a corporate word, but maybe I have
Hmm.
aspirations. Then the incoming commander may be coming into the only time in their entire life that they will get to do the type of command that they're about to step into, especially like wing command in the Air Force, one shot, unless
Hmm.
it's a big exception. They have a lot of dreams and aspirations that are I wouldn't say self-oriented, but are about them. How do they want to experience this time? How do they want to contribute? And so I think dialogue can really lower those insecurities in the same way as just getting to know anyone can lower your friction points with them. The ego piece is harder to be prescriptive about. If someone just has a really big ego, it may simply be a matter of being really aware
Hmm.
and acknowledging it and working around it. I don't think that incoming commanders should try to learn to be amateur therapists and change the egocentricity of another person, but they
Hmm.
can be really, really aware. And if they have sufficient thinking time, if they've taken care of themselves, all important parts of coming into new command, they will have a clear mind. And if they have a clear mind, they'll be able to suss out the other person, say, yeah, that's where that's coming from. And then they can more smartly
Mhm.
work.
Okay. So then, if I'm hearing you right, then part of our transition should not just be about the organization and leading it. It should be about the personal side and managing, the attitudes and the energy coming into it and the expectations coming into it. Is that a conversation that leaders should have?
Well, we intend to suggest it. So we see kind of three areas in leadership transition. There's the logistics, there's the visioning, and then there's the self-care. And I think that they are three distinct channels. So the logistics is what you guys are the best at. This is what we do, and this is over here, and this is
Mhm.
how many buildings we have. And you do tend to write it with too many words, which we could talk about. These continuity books where it's like chunk, and I would like it to go clink if possible. And so that's part of the prescription is to edit like a editor on fire through what you think they need to know. But that logistic part is really the easiest part. The visioning piece requires the comfort with solitude and the willingness to step back that I write about in the book, to take a minute to think and take a little white space and just go to your favorite hill with a bench or Starbucks with nothing but a legal pad and just think about who am I going to be and how do I want to show up and what's important to me and what leadership modeling have I seen in my entire career that I want to remember to be like right now. All of that, so incredibly critical. And then the self-care piece. Are you eating well? Are you sleeping? Is PT working in? How are you handling stress? Because you are the machine when you come in as the commander, and it is a, rough ride that is coming up. So I don't think machines ride, little mixed metaphor there, but
Yeah.
you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do little tiny versions of this myself. I am a CEO. I am the primary breadwinner in my family. I have 3 teenage boys. I travel all over the world. If I don't, let my ring drive my life and try to listen to it and get up when it tells me to and sleep more and all that, I won't be able to do those other things. And bravado and will, I mean, you guys are uniquely good at powering through, but just imagine how much better you could be if you were actually fueled and not overcoming the stress and exhaustion that you're so tough at ignoring. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
If you
Yeah.
actually were fueled, if you actually were slept, if you actually had, done a little breath work in the morning because you had a fight with your wife, if you actually did those things, imagine how much better you would be in command.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. Particularly because I feel like we get trapped into this head down execution mode, and we're not as metacognitively aware of our own performance day to day. The demands on the leaders, and just speaking from personal experience and just in command, it's task switching all day long, topic to topic to topic, and it's decision fatigue
Yes.
in a dozen different lanes. And it could be budgets, it could be training and planning, it could be logistics, like you said, it could be personnel and giving feedback to a subordinate, and it could also be something that's very emotional, such as you're sitting in a meeting talking about budgets, and then you get handed a piece of paper that says we've just had a sexual assault, which happens.
Yes.
It
Right.
happens too often, but often enough to get good at responding to it, unfortunately. And
And
so
that
you step out and you have to switch to this engaged emotional space, and that takes a toll. It really does.
yes, and if you don't have the margin, the space to kind of make those motions, it's really, really hard to make them. I think that also I think they use the word sensing in the military in a way that I'm still grasping, but it's kind of like a listening session, right? When a leader does a
Yeah, sensing
sensing
session. Yep.
session.
Hmm.
Is there something different about it just than sitting down and listening to someone? It's an odd term.
It it refers to a time where a leader will sit down with a specific group. So it could be a cross section of, let's say, sergeants of a certain type, infantry, maybe logistics or something like that. to sit down and get a sense of what's happening in the organization from that particular lens.
Get a sense. Okay, I was trying to figure out the derivation of this word sensing, which sounded so like Beverly Hills woo-woo to me, but it's a get a sense of makes sense. So, the reason I was going there is sensing requires you to have a clear mind. And I'm now using the word sensing just in the English language sense of it, where you come into a new group of people. If you want to feel the subtleties of what's happening in the room, if you want to feel who's a little against you, who's a little angry, who's a little reticent, you can't actually be very, very exhausted and have that perception. Your antenna will be flawed. And so, another reason for the self care is when you walk in well, if you walk in well, you have the extra generous perspective to really observe the people and kind of feel them out, and you can see who's who. And that's a really important part of building your squad.
Yeah, for sure. And then modeling that to everyone with the protecting that self care. This is probably a good time to mention that I got at the Army War College, and I shared some of this with you offline. But I got to do some quantitative research on the resident students there that talked about senior leader health and well being, and I got to write a chapter for a book that was dedicated to that, and it was on this work home health aspect. And across the board, leaders reported that they were overtasked. They were not, didn't feel like that they were plugged in throughout the day to who they wanted to be. They got much less sleep than they wanted to. They didn't take care of themselves the way they wanted to. And it panned out in a poor experience in leadership and in the positions they were in. The chapters in the book dealt with sleep and with some other therapeutic strategies to help your health and nutrition and physiological stuff and all that. So it's a fantastic book and a resource.
Remind me the book.
Yeah, it's called Senior Leader Health and Well-Being, and it was we published it in 21 as part of the Army War College. It's on PDF, available for free. Yeah,
that's actually my book is taught there, and so I'm familiar with some of those guys over there. Yeah, that the dichotomy between your focus and mine is actually pretty tightly knit because when we're, as an example, on the special ops side, they have the Human Performance Institute. And when we talk about that in special ops, we use the analogy of a car and a road. So if you have a car that's a sports car and you soup it up with perfect tires and great gasoline and a new paint job and you send it out on a road that's filled with potholes and detours and tumbleweeds and cracks, that car still can't go fast. So the car is the human, the road is the organization. And so human performance, or HP, H2F, right? In the regular Army,
right.
H2F,
Yep. Health and
all
holistic
that
fitness. Yep.
stuff that's about beautiful stuff, psychology, well-being, fitness, nutrition, spirituality, all that we love. That's optimizing the car. But then someone has to fix the road. So the road is, how do we work? What are our norms? How do we teach people? How do we use our time? And so that duality has been a constant conversation the whole time. In fact, we're trying to meet some of the H2F people because we think that goes together so beautifully.
Yeah. Well, I can connect you with a bunch of them. There was a fantastic team that we had. Yeah,
great.
I've had them in both battalion and brigade command. So you mentioned the leadership transition survey. What are some of the recurring themes and like aha moments that came out of the interviews?
So the survey was a digital survey, and I will plug again that it will serve everyone if more people take it. So first of all, can we talk about where would they be able to access that from your plot?
You can get it on the screen right here, and then we'll put it in the social media links when we repost.
Right.
In the show notes.
That survey was the place that we saw that. I think I gave you most of the highlights was that 24% was very alarming. We saw that correlation between time spent together and preparedness was just perfectly aligned. The thing in the qualitative comments that was interesting to me is how little people seem to have thought about this topic, as if they're writing as if it's, transition, that's probably important. We should think about that. And it wasn't something that seemed as tried and true and familiar to them. The negative, I would say, is that it was far easier for people to write about things that were bad about their previous transitions than to give positive examples. But the positive examples always seem to focus on really just one thing, and that is attention. I got attention from the exiting commander. I got it virtually, or I got on the phone, or I got it in person, or I got it in the way that they thoughtfully put together things for me. I had their attention. They were thinking of me. That is really the only ingredient that seems to matter. And then from there, everything else is kind of gravy.
When you get an email from the current commander, right, and you say, hey, you're on the list to come to this command, looking forward to doing this transition with you. Here's the plan I have mapped out. Here's a little bit about the organization. We'd love to hear about you and your family. Though that makes you, I can tell you from experience, it makes you feel enabled, makes you feel empowered, like you've got somebody on your team, because as the new person coming in, I mean, there's definitely some intimidation. You're coming in behind somebody
Yes.
who's been in for 2 years, and you're like, oh, I'm going to have to, you're not trying to overshadow them, but like I'm going to have some big shoes to fill. Maybe it's somebody you respect. It certainly was in my cases, and so it feels really enabling and empowering to have somebody on your team, and it's the person in the seat. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that feeling of see me as important, see me as a partner, see me as vital to the next chapter of this unit that you've loved so much and poured yourself into. See me as your partner in that. When people are seen, I think then it just takes a whole different lens on the relationship. I also think that we should talk a little bit about documents because a theme that comes up is these books and these continuity books and
hmm
things that are handed off. And I
Mine
don't,
was mine was that thick. I'm telling you, it
yeah.
was that thick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got an overwhelmed person who still has another job, right? They have another job
hmm
until they arrive, and they're moving their family and trying to figure out the schools and all of that stuff. By the way, we're interviewing some wives for a, view from the home front for the paper, and we still have a couple slots. So if anyone listening wants me to interview their wife, we still want to, or
Good.
partner or spouse. Um, so that whole thing is going on, and then you give them this horrible giant biology book size thing that they have to get through. It's another example of a lack of empathy. So what would
Mm,
really serve them? If you were seeing them, you would see that what they need is laser-like editing and clarity and remove having somebody assigned to remove things that are unimportant, streamline, clean up. If that book's been around since 1979 and someone's just been polishing it and refreshing it every year, take a bunch of old stuff out of it. I mean, and then there's things that are missing. So one of the things that we're creating as a model that we're playing with is this idea of baseball cards.
mhm.
So imagine if you were given a binder, could be digital or physical, and there's a little baseball card for every important community member. Maybe it's the fire chief, right? Has got his picture, his contact information, how many kids he has, maybe something he cares about. And you open this up and you don't have to weed through a stack of hay to try to figure out who is the community that you're
Yep.
stepping into. It's in the
Yep.
binder. So this idea of proactivity on behalf of the outgoing. Imagine if you had those baseball cards and they were digital, you could keep them updated like a contact management system we do in corporate, and you could just print them every 2 years. It'd be fabulous.
Mhm.
And all of these kind of ideas just come out of taking a little bit more time and caring a little bit more.
Exactly, exactly. The thing I'll add on to that, and I'm not sure if it's come up in some of your research, is the team that the incoming commander is also coming on board with, right? So when I'll just use brigade command as an
Right. Okay.
example. So brigade commander comes out on the list, and it's about 16 months out, maybe even sometimes longer. And so they have a full year and a half to prepare for the command. Oftentimes, and in my case, it was the case that all 7 of the battalions that would work in that brigade also were going to switch out on the same day. So we all found out on the same day, all 8 of us, that we would be working together in 18 months' time, and we'd be together for 2 years. So not only was it a transition opportunity that would have to come with the current team, but I felt a responsibility to build the team that I was going to work with. And so that was part of the transition as well. And so I sent them a letter right away and got on some Teams calls, tried not to overwhelm them. I'm sure they, would say that I was poking in some of their business because, like you said, they did have current jobs. But what I want to do is at least break the ice on who we were a little bit. We didn't talk about work or training or anything like that. It was just, hey, what are you doing? Who are you? What are you learning? What are you passionate about? Just to try to get a little bit of a conversation going. And the most important outcome of that was a text thread among the 7 of them, because what I
And
wanted was for them to be a cohesive team, not necessarily reflective of, connected to me. I wanted them to start to gel. And so starting that process as early as possible when the list came out was part of my transition process.
it'd be an interesting question that we didn't ask anybody. And this will be an iterative paper. I will continue to interview people and we'll just keep reissuing it every couple quarters because you keep adding goodness. Um, I've never asked anybody, have you ever heard of an incoming commander who refused to spend time with the outgoing? Because what you hear is the stories over and over and over of outgoing didn't give me the time that I needed. I wonder if it ever happens or if it's just so true and so universal that every incoming is hungry and ready and willing to meet and to spend time. I'd be really curious about that. The other character that we haven't talked about in this play, and I think of it as the most ignored character, is the staff. And however you define staff, if you define it as military staff or civilian staff, the human beings that are around these two people, once again, in the military stoicism of, I am so good at taking pain, um, then it's like, well, the staff is so good at absorbing all of the stress and angst and chaos of the transition. Well, what if they had to be a little less good at that? Could you actually proactively make that better for them? One technique, for instance, would be to reduce staff activities in the 4 weeks around transition. And this comes from our training in corporate. When we do a big new corporate initiative and we're going to add something to people's plate, we work with the leaders. We say, what could we either remove or pause during this period so that people have extra space, so they're not trying to squeeze extra things in on evenings and weekends, but they just have duty hours bandwidth, right? So imagine if the
Yeah.
2 weeks
Yeah.
before handoff and the 2 weeks after handoff, a lot of things were stopped or paused or shrunk on the staff's to-do list, and they just had more absorbable
Hmm.
bandwidth. They would not have to be so taxed. They would be able to flex and probably be more personable and present with every member of that experience. So this is another example of all we really gotta do is think about the other person, and that empathy piece starts kicking in and going, "Yeah, that must be a lot to absorb when you're already doing a super
Yeah.
hard,
Running full
taxing
speed.
job." Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it's spot on guidance for sure. To like, because the transition's already hard enough, but then to add that on top of your full workload, and to treat it like a major operation, because it certainly is. You may have heard this phrase come up, which I'm quite fond of, and it relates to what you're saying. And it's especially in the military, when commanders are going to turn over every couple of years. It's predictable, right? We know it's coming. And as you said, they're looking forward to it their whole lives. This is their chance, their big moment. They're going to be on that stage. They're going to be front and center of the formation. And they have all the energy, and they've been building up to this moment. And then they come in with all this energy, and the staff has been running hard to the end for the old commander, the outgoing commander, and they are spent. And the analogy is it's the reverse Pony Express effect, right? If you recall, the Pony Express would, you have the same rider and you swap out the tired horse for a fresh one, and in the reverse Pony Express is what
Oh,
we
I
do too
never heard
often.
that.
Is that we swap out the same tired horse with a fresh rider,
Oh
keep
my gosh,
going.
that's so I mean, the image you're giving me, another horse image that's coming to mind, it's like the valiant new king is about to be crowned, and they bring up his mighty steed, and it's this exhausted, slump-backed, weary, filthy horse. I love that, and that's yet again not impossible to avoid. Not impossible to avoid, just, how could we take our brilliant brains that if they had to fix a problem in the field or a problem when deployed, they would just dig into it and come up with 100 solutions. Like, okay, the staff is too worn out to be vital in the first 2 months of new command. What are our options? Who can we talk to? What systems or processes in other branches or other places like corporate could we model to understand what's possible here? We need I guess we do need an optimized, vital, energetic staff if we want to kick off well. What are our options? And that's exactly what the lens of intentionality does.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, good. Before we move off of the topic of transitions here, what are any other resources that you would point people to? You mentioned the paper a second ago. What else can they go to?
Well, I will not point them toward the Army Transitions Handbook because it is the only official thing that I have read that you publish on this topic. I tried to stay
Hmm.
away from any kind of internal publication so I could see it with a fresh light, but that is a pretty averagely overwritten, dense, wordy tome that I would think would be hard to parse value out of. The corporate book, The First 90 Days, is a really nice visioning and thinking guide and comes with a workbook if you choose to buy it. That can be a really nice visioning and thinking guide for the incoming commander. It doesn't really speak to any of the other characters in the play that we have talked to, but it is a nice visioning guide. It's
Okay,
called The First 90
the
Days of
first 90
Financial
days. Okay, what's a piece of advice that you received that just immediately stuck with you and has stayed with you ever since?
Well, I'm a sensitive person. I would have probably done terrible in any branch of the military, but so the one that I always use is when something bad happens in my business, think less about how it makes me feel and think more about how it improves my work. And so I've had to think about that one a lot over it's 25 years I've been doing this work. Um, I think you guys as a population are probably pretty good at corralling feelings to keep them from intruding. But as I've gotten older, I've actually progressed that to more of a three-step process, which is first give feelings their due, allow myself to be angry, embarrassed, disappointed when it's run its course, and then I make the specific pivot from 2 to 3, which is not to say, "That made me feel this way," but that painful lesson or that embarrassing thing that just happened can help my business in what way? So we had a vendor as an example that, kinda cheated us out of some money, right? And I was so angry, and that came in pretty fast in my head is, "Well, how does this help my work?" There were 2 or 3 places where I could have asked for another referral, been clearer about vetting the company, poked deeper into reviews, met there and even just been more authoritative in asking for what I want in early moments when that spidey sense is saying, "This doesn't feel quite right to me," and you're just going along. You always have a lesson to learn. In fact, almost when a feeling is stimulated by definition, there will always be some kind of lesson to learn. So I would say that's a big one for me.
So when you think of great leadership, someone who has truly embodied what you see and has inspired leadership, who comes to mind and why?
I think I'm just very fixated on him right now, but I've been lucky enough to meet Joe Votel recently,
Hmm.
and I just think he's magical. I just think he's a magical combination of so smart and informed, but everyone you meet has a feeling of being seen. And we were talking about that earlier. Just see me. And the way that he can make you feel seen, the way that he seems to remember people that he talks about. If anyone's not familiar with his career, now he's starting to write and speak. I think he's working on a book. I would be tracking that one pretty closely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. I've had the chance to not work for him, but hear him several times, and I have always been impressed. Yeah, particularly his insight on strategic communication really landed with me at the Army War College.
And I wanna give a resource I wanna make sure we give a resource too of the military group in case before we close it out. So we are creating a military leadership think tank. It's a LinkedIn community under groups, and it is for any present or past military leaders. We have gone very quickly in about 5 weeks ago from the time of this recording to now we have about 400 members just over, and it's growing. And not only will it be an amazing place to talk about efficiency, transition, intentionality, but it will also become a community as people start moving in and out of the military where they can support each other in that other kind of transition, which we think is so powerful. So Tell all your leadership friends. If you just go on LinkedIn and you look up in the search bar, win back time, it will come up under groups and you can join provided that you have a military background.
Great. Win back time on
Win back
LinkedIn.
time. Yeah. And
Perfect.
then
Okay.
we're trying to build these various groups and communities because I think that when we do this intentionality stuff together, it gets better and better.
It's an important conversation, and this has been so helpful. Thanks for all you do, not just for leaders out there, but also particularly for the military leaders. This audience are the ones that you are serving lately, and we really do appreciate it. It's valued, I can tell you that, and we need to hear more of it. So thanks for spending the time with us today. And to everyone watching, be sure to subscribe to the Military Leader Podcast and the YouTube channel, where I'll post the full video interviews. You can visit themilitaryleader.com and subscribe by email to get the latest leader development content. But most importantly, take these insights into your own leadership day and share them with your network of fellow leaders. Be a conduit, not a roadblock. When you discover something insightful that can help you and others become a better leader, it will make a difference. And so until then, lead well.